video covers the assembly and installation of the Bravo and Alpha roof rack for the 22 and up Tundra Double Cab that I've got here behind me. We've had it in the shop for the last couple of days doing the R&D on it. That's why you guys see the masking tape up here on the top of it. You don't necessarily have to do that when you do the install, but we do it here. It's just a good idea. We're taking these racks on and off the truck so many times that we're bound to screw up the paint one way or the other when we're moving stuff around. So I always like to mask and tape them off. It's important to note that both the Alpha and Bravo have full functionality with the factory moonroof. So the vent function and the open and close work with no additional required fresh air kit or anything like that. You can put this rack together and put it on the truck with basic hand tools, except that you're going to need a rivet gun for the final anchor. We've designed a system on here that allows you to drill very small holes in the drip rail and then anchor some compression rivets to hold the rack onto the vehicle of the truck. So this rack does require drilling and the installation of rivets, but everything else about it is pretty straightforward. Please be aware that we have two videos here. We have a Crew Max video and then the double cab video. Make sure if you're installing on the double cab that you're watching the proper video. This video is not for a Crew Max, it's for a double cab. And that's going to be pretty critical when you make one of the measurements on the top of the truck for getting the rack aligned on the top of the vehicle where it's supposed to sit. The Crew Max math is completely different, so make sure if you're doing a double cab that this is the video that you're watching. I'm going to start by showing you guys where this is actually going to attach to the vehicle, rather. If I get up here, so see inside of this drip rail channel, it's got this rubbery kind of sealant to it, and then back here there's a stop and some black plastic. The roof rack's actually going to mount inside of this channel right here. It's not going to mount to the inside edge or the outside edge. You're going to be attaching your feet inside of here. This rack, I'm going to show you guys how to put it together on the truck physically, as opposed to putting it together on the ground and picking it up and lifting it onto the vehicle. I think that these locator racks that get riveted are easy to assemble on the vehicle as opposed to putting them together on the ground, because the feet do slide back and forth on the load bar, and it just eliminates or lessens the amount chance for damage when you're trying to pick the rack up and put it on the vehicle. So we're going to start by cleaning these channels so that the provided foam seals that we ship you can be attached. That's going to be one of the first things we're going to do. Then I'll show you guys how to assemble the feet to the load bar parts, and then we'll put the rack together on the truck. So for this part, I just use a basic aerosol window cleaner. You want to spray the entire track of the vehicle, and then just use a microfiber towel and clean any of the dirt or the junk that's out of that area. Unlike some of the stuff that we've seen online, you do not have to modify or remove this rubber gasket that's in here. It's actually seam sealer and it's painted in, so you couldn't pop that out if you wanted to. So we're going to be going right over the top of that. So go ahead and clean both sides, and then we'll put the foam strips in. Your kit includes some foam gasket material. We're going to use that as a sealant between the foot and the actual drip rail of the truck. You will have to cut this to length. We just ship you one big piece, and then you put it on the driver's side or passenger side and cut it to length, and then the remainder goes on the other side of the truck. I'm starting on the passenger side. So if you see where this black plastic cap is, all this is like the cosmetic cover that comes up over the back of the truck, and then there's a little lip, like a little metal rail right there. We're going to start this foam at that metal rail. I usually just pull back like 8-10 inches of it. You're going to start it right at that lip right there, and you don't want to pull on this. See how it'll stretch and thin itself out? You just want to let it fall into that channel and work your way down. I'll reposition the camera and show you where we stop at the front of the vehicle, but let me get this going. So this is the split right here between the driver and passenger, or the front and rear door rather, and then just letting it fall into that channel, and then once we have it to length, we'll come back and cut it down and press it all in place real nice. So just as it starts to curve up here, like right there we go. So just as it starts to curve up here, you want to cut this to where it's about 4 inches short of the lip of the front window. So let me cut this and I'll show you guys. So put that in. So here's the front factory gasket. you leave about a 4-inch section exposed so that this is not visible from the front of the vehicle. And then you're just gonna work that down and press it down smooth the whole way, like that. And that's gonna provide a nice base so that the feet that we put up here, you don't have to put sealant between the feet and the truck. Now you will have to put sealant over the rivet heads just as a precaution. The rivets that we include in the kit are supposed to be waterproof, but I think it's always better safe than sorry. Anytime we're drilling holes like that, I want sealant over the screws or the rivet heads, just so we know that we have a completely watertight seal for the entire time that you're gonna own this vehicle. So go ahead and put the foam strip on the other side of the truck, and I'm gonna start getting the stuff ready for the roof rack. Then we'll come back and we'll talk about how to put the load bar feet together and get the first 3 load bars on top of the truck. So next we're going to pre-assemble the feet. There are 6 total feet that need to be assembled. 4 of them will be exactly the same, and then 2 of them will be different. The 2 different ones are for the front so that we can use the slots in this guy to account for the slope of the front of the vehicle to still get everything lined up properly. But in your kit you've got 4 of these rivet bases like this. They've got 6 holes in them crossed here, and then the 2 slots where the rivets will drill and install into the drip rails of the vehicle. So again, there are 4 of those in your kit. Then you have 2 of these. The same basic size, it still has rivet holes that are not countersunk at all, so they're just flush holes across the top for through holes, and they have 2 large slots in them like this. These will be the front feet. You've got 6 load bar clamps. These are part number 1371. They are the exact same. There's just 6 of them in your kit. And all of them will attach to the load bars via this long slot here. And then they'll attach to the rivet bases through these holes on this location. So you're effectively going to be taking the base and the foot, lining up the holes the way we tell you, and putting them together like this. And that is the exact same orientation and assembly method for the Alpha and the Bravo rack. There is absolutely no difference between the 2. So if you're doing an Alpha rack, your hardware will say feet to rack on the bag, but it'll be hex bolts. Now ultimately I'm putting a Bravo rack on this truck, so that's what we're working with today for this video. It's gonna say feet to rack as well, but it'll be button head bolts. So in that bag with those buttons, you'll have washers and you'll have nylocks. And again, that's gonna be the exact same for the Alpha, just with a hex bolt instead of a button head bolt. So I'm gonna get my hardware together, and then we'll come back and put these together. I'm gonna start by assembling what will be the rear and middle feet of the vehicle, and all 4 of these are gonna assemble the same way. So if you see where those holes align, like this right here, you guys can see that. I want it all the way down, so you'll be able to see through all 6 holes, 3 per side there. We're gonna take the button head bolts and push them through the upper holes, like that, and then flip it around, and we're gonna put a washer and a nylock on each set of threads. Now, I don't want to fully tighten these because I want a little bit of articulation in here to help me line up on the roof of the vehicle, right? We're accounting for a bow on the top of a truck, so we've got to have a little bit of play in here to not put the load bars in a bind when we're sliding them across, especially if you're putting this roof rack together by yourself. So on the Bravo rack, I'll use a 5mm Allen and a 13mm wrench to tighten these up a little bit. On the Alpha, you'll use a pair of 1/2-inch wrenches to tighten up the hex head hardware. So for that Bravo, I'm going to take a 5mm and a 13. Grab that guy right there. And I'm going to tighten them up just enough. The reason you want to do a little bit of pre-assembly like this is just because they're a little long-winded, and you've got to get up in there between the rack to fully tighten them. So see how it slopes down like that? I want a little bit tighter than that. There we go. So I've still got that much play in it. That's a good amount right there. Do the same thing on the other bolt. So just tighten that guy up. So you should be able to put together 4 sets that are exactly like this, and this is going to be your rear and middle feet. So go ahead and put those 4 together, then we'll come back and we'll do the front. All right, so next you'll have, you've got your rear and your middle feet done, so you should have 2 more of these left over, and then the 2 fronts. So same basic idea in that they'll align like this right here, and then we're going to put the bolts in, but we'll put the bolts in the middle holes. So I'm just going to drop them in the middle. And you could put them up here at the top, but putting them up at the middle allows a little bit more articulation. And you know what? I don't think that's in the right spot. Let me check my pictures. So you overlap the foot over the slots like this, and they will line up. And I'm going to put the bolts in the bottom holes, just so I can get more articulation up. And then on the back, you're going to put your washer and your nylock. And just like with the rear and middle feet, you go ahead and tighten these up almost all the way, just enough that it'll still rock back and forth a little bit to make it easier to articulate this thing. So. So I still have plenty of movement like this. I still have a little bit of teeter-totter action right there. That's the way I want this to be for now. So you should have 2 that are set up like this. Those are going to be for the front. Then you'll have the other 4. And again, right now, it doesn't matter if it's an Alpha or a Bravo rack. You should be following along doing this exact same thing. In the bag of hardware that says feet to load bars, you're going to find these 3-tapped threaded inserts, as well as a bunch of button head bolts, lock washers, and flat washers. This is one of the steps where you're going to want to apply the thread locker prior to putting this assembly together, and you will do all 6 feet before they're ready to go on the vehicle. In your kit, you'll have some VC3. It's probably going to be in a tube like this. I don't think that we'll be shipping a pillow pack with this. So you should have this tube, and you have to use the top to bust it open. Internally, the little Jedi mind trick secret is I don't use the actual applicator. I just use the top of the bucket like that. Go ahead and take every one of those bolts and put a lock washer and a flat washer on them like that. And then I'm just going to apply a little bit of thread locker to the threads like so. And I'm going to let those air dry for about 10 or 15 minutes, just until that thread locker sets up. Now it won't dry completely. It'll always be a little bit gummy. It's kind of like a shock for your hardware, but go ahead and do them all like that. Let them air cure, and then we'll put the threaded inserts into the tops of the feet along these load bar areas here. And then once we've got that done, we're ready to preload 3 load bars and set the 3 load bars on top of the truck that we're going to use to put the rack together. So your threaded inserts, we have 2 different kinds. We have some that are tapered to fit the inside channel of the load bar, and then we have some like this with a protrusion on them. If you're working with the ones with the protrusions like I'm doing here, the protrusions go to the inside area of the foot. They do not face this direction. You want to flip this over so that it's flat. Line that up and just start those bolts by a couple of threads by hand. We're not going to tighten anything up yet. Put it together like this, and each one of these will get 3. And ultimately what I want is, see how I can move that back and forth right now? I want all 6 of them to be the exact same way. So this is a front foot, obviously. Go ahead and do the remaining front foot, and then the middle and rear feet as well. So all of the load bars in your kit are the same size. It doesn't matter which ones of these that you use, but you need to grab 3 of them to do this next step. You're going to install 2 feet to each load bar. The 4 feet that you have that are the same, 2 of those will go to one, the remaining 2 will go to the other, and the 2 front feet will go to the 3rd load bar, which we'll put in the front of the roof rack. If you look at the extrusion here, you've got the top or bottom, rather, either or, has 2 slots. We're aiming this threaded insert to the side slot here, and it will just install at the end like that, and then it should freely slide back and forth. Now you want to flip the load bar around and put it on the opposite end with the other foot. So if I move this guy like that, There we go. So both of the feet are on this one, and if you look, they're on one side of the load bar down there. They're on the opposite side of the load bar up here. That's by design. One, it helps with twist, which is an engineering thing that we've dealt with on roof racks in the past. But two, it just simplifies this because we can use 1 foot for all 6 locations as far as the load bar clamp is concerned. So go ahead and load up the remaining feet that you have. Remember, 2 of the front feet go on one load bar, the other 2 go on the middle and rear. Then we're ready to set these up on the truck. So we're up on the truck now. This is that foam strip that we put on. We're going to be aiming the base of this foot onto this foam strip, and I'm on the passenger side, so I'll just pick it up and set it on top of the truck to the other side of the vehicle. So if you just pick it up like this and set it to where those fall in the channel. Right now we're not too concerned about the placement of this, right? But that is what it should look like right now. It's just freely sitting on there. I'll go move the other side till it falls in. And like I said, right now we don't really care where it is. We want one close to the back, one kind of in the middle, and then the front one will go up here towards the front. But we'll be using the roof rack side, so either your Bravo side or your Groove Tech, to assemble to these load bars that will help us start to set the placement on where the rack should be on the vehicle. I've got all 3 of them setting up here. This is the foot with the holes in it, foot with the holes in it, foot with the slots in it. And this is the rear of the vehicle, the middle of the vehicle, and towards the front of the vehicle. So if you watch, the foot's just kind of resting in the channel right now, and we're not very critical of the placement of this. So for this next step, whether you're installing an Alpha or a Bravo, it's going to be the same. You're going to want the hardware that says load bars for Bravo, or the hardware that says load bars all other for the Alpha rack. This is a Bravo side. You see the slots across the top here? That's where your load bars are going to attach to. If you had a Groove Tech for an Alpha rack, you would have like a notch up here, and then this piece is very sculpted and cut up. You've also got a couple of additional holes, and in those holes going across the body, you've got these gold rib nuts in them. For the Bravo rack, there is no dedicated driver or passenger side. For the Alpha rack, the Groove Tech does have a driver or passenger side, simply because the protrusion, not the flat side, but the protrusion of the rib nut needs to face the inside of the vehicle. On the outside where it's flat, that's where the spacers will go between the Armor and Groove Tech to create the channels for your quick wire harnesses if you're choosing to install those at the same time. So to anchor this to the roof, we're going to start with the load bar hardware. For the Bravo, it's a bag that just says load bars because they're all the same. For an Alpha rack, you've got 2 bags of hardware for the load bars. One of them says load bar first and last, and they're hex bolts. You're not going to use those for this step. The other bag says load bars all or other. That's the bag that you would want to do this, and we're going to align it to slots across here to hang the sides up on the truck. Now, we're making some transitions on hardware. We're divorcing, so to speak, from the lock washers. So if your hardware kit has lock washers in it, you should definitely use them. If it does not have lock washers in it, you're going to want to apply that thread locker to all of your load bar bolts like this. And I just ran a strip up the side about 3/4 of an inch long on every bolt and let those dry. So now I'm going to put the Bravo side up, and once I get it up, I'll show you guys what it would look like and kind of talk about the difference between the Alpha and the Bravo. So no matter which one, Alpha or Bravo, you've got 7 slots across the top of the roof rack here. I went ahead and put some masking tape to indicate the 3 slots that we'll be aiming for when we go to put the side on the roof of the truck to start with. It's not going to be the rear one, it's going to be the one in front of the rear one. Then you'll skip one, then it's the next one, then you'll skip one, the next one, and the front one won't have a foot attached to it. The sides are going to attach to the threaded holes in the ends of the load bars at each of these locations. I've got the sides started. It's just simply sitting on the truck right now. I've got the bolts started in this location here, so I skip the rear, catch this one, then I skip one, catch this one, skip the next one and catch this one, and then that leaves the front load bar right there. Right now the whole rack's just kind of sitting. I can move it by hand. We're not really worried about the placement or the position. So go ahead and go put the driver's side on as well. And again, if you guys are doing Alpha or Bravo at this point, doesn't matter. You'd be attaching your Groove Tech on an Alpha rack right now, but we're installing the Bravo. The other side is on the truck now. So I'm gonna use a 5/32 Allen wrench, and we're gonna set the hardware on these first 3 load bars to pinch this rack together and tighten it up to these load bars so we can put in the others. Now, for the positions, the rear foot, you want that slid all the way back into the back of that slot. So once it's locked in there, just gonna tighten that guy up. Okay, and then we've skipped it obviously. So the middle foot, we want that pushed all the way forward. So that one. And make sure this rack's not gonna move on us here. Okay. And then the front foot, we also want pushed all the way forward. We want it as close to the front of the rack as we can get it. So front foot all the way forward, middle foot all the way forward, rear foot all the way back. Go do the same thing with the load bars on the driver's side of the vehicle, then we're ready to put in the other load bars. The remaining load bars are going to install into the slots here across. And again, all the load bars in the kit are the same, so it doesn't matter where you put them. The only alternative that you do have though is for the front. If you see this slot with the 3 holes underneath it, this allows you to mount that front load bar either horizontally like the 3 that are connected to the feet, or vertically at any of these 3 positions. And the reason that we give you that is because if you guys are running the larger light bar setups like the 5LP6, 4LP9, it's a lot of weight on the front of the roof rack, and the load bars are stronger vertically than they are horizontally. So we give you guys some options for that. On the Alpha rack, you'll have that exact same feature, but in between the slots and the holes, you would have some little machined rectangles right here. Those are simply for passing wiring from one side of the vehicle to the other and keeping it concealed behind the armor on your Alpha rack. So I'm gonna put in these 3 load bars, but I'm not gonna put that front one in yet. I'm gonna leave it out until after I've put the windscreen in, just so I have more access for my tools. Depending on the options that you selected when you place your order from us, your windscreen can look a lot of different ways. Ultimately, this customer has decided to have no lighting installed in the front, so we have the no-cut version. You could have machined holes, slots, notches. We literally make specific cutouts for probably 20 different lighting applications. If you're installing lighting into the roof rack, I suggest that you go check out our lighting and electrical video prior to, because in some cases we'll prompt you to install the lighting before you put the front windscreen on. In other cases we'll prompt you to install it after. It really just depends on the lighting that you're installing into the roof rack if you've chosen to do so. For the Alpha or Bravo rack, either one, you want the bag of hardware that says fairing and or windscreen. For the Bravo roof rack, you're going to need a 3/16" Allen wrench and a 1/2 inch wrench. And for the Alpha rack, you're going to need a 5mm Allen and a 13mm wrench. The windscreen will attach into the roof rack at these holes on the end of this bent flange here, and these bent flanges will install to the inside of the edges of the roof rack, not on the outside. If you get them on the outside, you're going to have alignment issues and the holes won't even line up with each other. So we always have to quantify that point, but the windscreen's installed to the inside. So I'm going to put this windscreen on the truck. This is a 2-person job. I'm going to go get somebody to come and help me line this thing up and bolt it on into the truck, and then I'll show you guys. But before we do, I want to point out, when you go up on the truck, on the Bravo rack, you have these 2 holes right here. That's where that flange is going to go to the inside and line up, and then your hardware will go through and your nuts go on the inside. For the Alpha rack, you have that machine groove tech coming around like this. Those holes are in the same spot, and that's where your windscreen is going to attach to. The windscreen hardware is started. You can see the flange is on the inside of the roof rack. This is the passenger side of the truck, by the way. And then on the inside, I've got those nylocks. And again, on a Bravo rack, you're going to use a 3/16 Allen on the outside and a 1/2 inch wrench on the inside, and just tighten those bolts up. They're nylock, so when they lock in, you'll know that they're tight enough to do the job. So get that one. And that guy. So with those tightened up, I'll go do the same thing on the other side, and then we're going to be ready to install that front load bar. That's the last step before we start to position this rack on the truck where it's actually supposed to be sitting. So for this next step, we're going to need a tape measure. The very first thing that we want to do is get the rack properly positioned at the rear of the vehicle using the indicators that we've got from the factory, just because there's nowhere to measure at the front. So we make one measurement at the rear, set the rear of the rack in the right location, then we're ready to drill and install some feet, and then we'll work our way forward to do the rest of the anchoring. On the Alpha and Bravo roof rack, it is critical that the rear mount foot is in the back position. Cannot be in the forward position at all. It's got to be fully back like it is in this video right here. So when you look over, now you have the back of your foot, and from the back of that foot to this little black lip right here should be 3 inches exactly. So let me pull enough of this guy out. There we go. So if I butt the tape measure up against that and I go to that black lip right there, I'm 3 inches. You want to do the same thing on both sides of the truck. Once you've got the back of this in place, we're going to go ahead and drill and install the rivets to these rear feet. Then we'll work our way forward. So the next step is going to be to drill and install the rivets in the drip rails of the truck to secure the rivet bases that your feet are anchored to, which ultimately hold the roof rack on the vehicle. For this particular truck, what we provided you guys is called a compression rivet. And I set one not in some metal so you can actually see what happens to this thing as you crank it down with your rivet gun. This is the underside of it here, and it starts life like this, just this tube, right? So with the pull on the other end. And then once it's been pulled and set, so I didn't set this one in metal, like there was nothing in between it, so it broke this stem off. But the idea is to show you that underneath your roof, it splits this thing into 4 tongues that literally just bite the underside of the roof of the vehicle and suck that foot down, compressing it into that foam. And once you get one on both sides of it, you have a very sturdy base that'll last a long time. And because they're aluminum, we don't have to really worry about corrosion. So we provide you guys with all of the rivets that you'll need in the kit. Each foot will get 2, and we did include some spares because inevitably you'll miss one every now and then. It happens to me too. So, and we also include the final size drill bit for the rivets. I do recommend, and I'm going to show you in the video, I pre-drill it with a little bit smaller drill bit first, which we don't include, and then ultimately I'll open that hole up with the final size drill bit. So you'll need a cordless drill, and probably I'm using a 9/64 pilot bit, which wouldn't be in your kit. And you guys will have the final drill bit in your kit, but you're also going to need a rivet gun. You can get these at virtually any hardware store. I'm not super concerned with the quality of it. The nicer one you buy, the easier they are to use. But the reality is all that matters is that you have an 1/8 inch shank mandrel. And then you put the rivet in, and I'll do another one here so you guys can see it. But once the hole's drilled in the roof, we'll put the rivet down in there through the foot. And as you start to, let me remove the clip. As you start to compress this rivet in there, you'll see it start to peel back, right? So the more we work that thing in, and somewhere right around in there is where it's going to snap off in the roof of your truck, which is what we want. Right now I don't have the foot and the truck metal in between, so let's just say that's what would be left there. But ultimately, once you finally get it down and it can't take any more tension, it'll pop. And you'll hear it snap like that. And there's a stem that would come out. It's in there somewhere, right? So they really don't like being compressed without metal. But there's a stem that'll come out, and you discard that stem, you won't need it. So I'm starting on the passenger rear. We're gonna align it. We'll check our measurements again just to make sure. Then we'll drill the pilot bit and then we'll open it up to the final size. So a couple things to check. We want to make sure that the rear load bar is all the way back in that slot that it goes in there. And the foot, if you see, I'm riding just to the inside lip there of that foam strip to give enough clearance for that wing to fit in the drip rail between the trucks. So I'm going to be drilling a hole here and then on the other side right there. And I'll start with my smaller drill bit. And you've got to go through like a layer of that weather stripping and our foam, and then you'll get into the metal. So I'm down in there, now I'm going to go into the metal. So, blow that out of the way there. That's the small drill bit, like the pilot hole. We went all the way through. So now I'll switch out to the big bit. This is the drill bit that's included in your kit. We lined it up in that hole. It makes it much easier to drill. Small drill bits chew metal faster than large drill bits, and they don't spit as much chip. So doing that small little pilot bit in there really does speed this up. So I've got the rivet gun loaded with the rivet. Let's see if I can get you guys set up in here. So this is going to go down between the hole into the truck. So how do we get this? There we go. So I just put a little downforce on the rivet gun and crank the handle. And then once I've got that first pull on it, I can really concentrate on just the handle. And you see it sucking that foam down. It's really starting to pull that foot into that foam right there. There it pops, and if I can get it to fall out, there's the stem that it yanked out. So that's the first one, completely locked in there, very solid. And underneath your roof, that is what's going on. So now I'm going to drill this one and mount it. Passenger rear foot is riveted on both sides. Now I'm just going to go over and do the same thing on the passenger rear. Once I have the rear locked down, I'm just going to work my way down the passenger side of the truck and do the middle and the front, and then the driver's side and do the middle of the front. Right now, this is still loose, this is still loose, the rack will move left or right. We need to get all 6 of those rivet bases anchored to the vehicle so that we can center the rack and adjust the height of the front feet before we finish up the installation. All 12 holes are drilled, all the rivets are installed to the bases. This is the 6 on the passenger side. And then obviously the 6 on the driver's side. So next, I want to take some RTV silicone sealant and put it over these rivet areas just to seal them up. Now technically when you compress an aluminum rivet like this, it should be fairly watertight, it shouldn't require sealant, but it's good practice to put the sealant over those rivets just so that we're 100% sure that we're going to be watertight forever, right? So silicone wise, we just use, we get it at Home Depot. It's just an RTV exterior grade silicone. And it's important to note that it's going to take it between 24 and 48 hours to dry, depending on where you live, so no pressure wash or anything like that. If the truck gets rained on immediately after, it's really not going to hurt it, but you don't want to take it to a car wash or anything crazy like that. So I'm just going to put it, I'll try and show you. There we go. So yeah, we can see that. So I just fill that area with it, and then just give it a little bit of a wipe, just to seal that up completely. And you should, you see that right there. So I've been doing them, whoa, come here. I've been doing them this way for quite a while, and I've never had an issue with them when we do them like this. So I'm just going to seal up the remaining 11 rivet heads, and then we'll move on to centering the rack. So with everything sealed up, now we're ready to lift the front of the roof rack up. Before we try and get it centered left to right, we need to take advantage of those slots in those front feet so that we can lift the snout of the rack up. I do this with just a towel. So I'll fold it over a little bit just to use as a buffer. And if I can put this here, see if I can move the camera up a little bit. There we go. There we go. So I'll just take it and I lift the front of the rack up and get that towel underneath there. And I'll start coming back and forth and checking to make sure that our gap is even across the front. Right now it's not quite there, so I need to lift the front up a little bit more. I do a lot of these by myself, so I end up using this little towel. If you have somebody to help you, you can just have them push up on the front of the rack. You guys visually verify it, and then you use, on the Bravo rack, you would use a 5mm Allen and a 13mm wrench to tighten up the bolts between the load bar clamp and the front foot, like the rivet base. On an Alpha, you'd use a pair of 1/2-inch wrenches. So I'm gonna go ahead and push and pull on this and get the front of the rack up so that everything's level. Tighten up those front feet, then we'll be ready to adjust to side to side. I've got some towels wedged underneath the front end on both sides. And I just, the further up the A-pillar here that you push them, the higher it'll raise the rack up. So all I start watching is the body line on the rack right here. And once I'm sure that it's even, I just move this in and out until it adjusts. Once I'm sure that it's even, then I'll tighten up those front bolts down in there first, and then I'll tighten up the remaining ones after we've centered the rack. So I've got those 2 front feet tightened up. Like we've stated a few times, we're installing a Bravo rack on this truck. If you guys are installing an Alpha, before you do that, you want to go ahead and install your armor and your grab handles to it. With your armor, you'll have 2 bolts to the outside that align to rib nuts at the front and rear, and the remaining 4 holes in the center are for your grab handles. You'll want to get them on before you start to center up the rack, because on the Alpha with the offset with the armor, it's a little easier to center if you have the armor on the vehicle while you're trying to do that step. So for the Bravo, I've got the front feet tightened up on the inside. I can pretty freely move the rack left to right up there now. So I'm just going to take a tape measure. I'm going to get in the bed of the truck and I'm going to start in the back. I'm going to use the antenna. I'm going to measure in from the inside edge of the rack 26.5 inches, because it has a 53-inch load bar, just to center the rear of the rack. I'll tighten up those bolts first. Then I'll move my way forward using visual indicators from the front of the truck to make sure that the front of the rack is square as well. Once you know that it's centered, I want you to tighten up all the load bar clamp bolts, the 3 small bolts to the load bars first. And then finally, you'll go back through and tighten up the bolts between the clamp and the rivet bases. All right, so at the back of the truck, I'm gonna measure from the inside edge here. I'm gonna come over and hit the middle of this, because we know the antenna is middle of the truck, because Toyota engineers never make a mistake, right? So right now I'm sitting at about 26.1/8, which means I need to move it towards the driver's side and the rear. So I can just shift it, and there's almost 26.5. So let me go a little bit further. See what I got here. That's 26.5. So now we're centered at the back of the vehicle in relation to the antenna. So I'm going to tighten up these 3 bolts and these 3 bolts first. Then I'll work my way forward all the way from the rear to the front of the vehicle. At the front of the vehicle, and I'll show you guys what to use. I use the side of the roof rack with the drip rail of the truck just to make sure that it's centered. It's important to note that before you tighten up these 3 bolts in the back, if you see this, that rear load bar is resting. It's touching that antenna right there. So you put your hand underneath the outside of the rack right here, lift up on it. This goes level with the top of the load bar, and then we're going to set those bolts in place. That's got the 3 on the driver's side. Now I'll go to the passenger side and do the same thing. With those in, I'm locked in at the back. Now the rack's not going to shift left to right at all. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up these bolts here. Again, on an Alpha, that's going to be a pair of 1/2" wrenches. On a Bravo, it's going to be a 5mm and a 13. With the back all set in and put center of the truck and tightened up, we're ready to do the front. And there's not a really good spot to measure off the front of just about any vehicle. So what you're really watching is I check the outside of the rack here versus where it falls on this drip rail right here. So like for me, if I follow this down, it almost falls right to the inside edge of the drip rail. I want to compare that from both sides, go back and forth a couple times, shift it back and forth here as needed, get it leveled up, and then tighten those load bar clamps up on both sides. That'll leave the middle. You always want to do the middle last because you need to do the rear then the front, because if you do the middle first, then you can't move the front at all. So we're going to do the rear, then the front, then we're good. So I've got the front adjusted in now. I know I'm centered left to right. I had somebody else verify it for me too, because you just never know what kind of day you're going to have. So I got my 5/32. I'm going to push up on the front of the rack a little bit as I tighten this foot, and then let me loosen. There we go. Let me loosen this guy up just a touch. There we go. Push that and then twist that. So from there, I'll tighten up my load bar bolts first. Okay, and then I'll lock down those the rail clamp bolts again. So that's got my front all locked in. We're centered across here. Our height is good. We're level. All that's going to be left now are the middle feet. So typically, if you look down, the roof rack should be a very straight line. If the middle's out of adjustment, it'll be bowed one way or the other. You'd make that adjustment, and by pushing it, you know, left or right on the driver's side to the passenger side. But once you're dialed in and you're sure that you've got it, then you're going to tighten up your load bar bolts first. And finally, you will tighten up the clamp bolts on the inside. And I do have to use an L key for these. So at this point, your rack is on. Everything is nice and tight. Our spacing is good through here. You guys can refer to the torque specifications at the end of this guide. There we go. You guys can refer to the torque specifications posted at the end of this guide. You want to go back around the roof rack, make sure everything's tight, lock everything down, and then periodically check those bolts against those torque specs, especially after heavy use, long trips on dirt roads, stuff like that. Just like everything else on the truck, that's kind of the maintenance required for keeping one of these things together. And if you ever need spare parts, you have questions, you run into any issues through the installation, please reach out to support@uptopoverland.com.